Hi guys, I am here in Stockholm taking a walk with Charlotta Forss, a senior lecturer at Stockholm University.
Am I senior lecturer?
It says so on the website.
Okay, then I am. Yes. Then
we'll take what it says on the website.
Yes, that sounds good.
In history. So, how did you end up in research? Was it always meant?
Well, I think when I look back at it now, it looks like there's this kind of pattern that it was somehow one step led to another in a very kind of natural way, but it really didn't. It didn't feel like that at the time, at least. So it's the kind of more the accidental steps that, in hindsight, look like they were intentional. I guess. But I started out studying political science, and I like that a lot. And then I took a course in history, and I liked that even better. And also I realized that I was not falling asleep when I was reading the books that I was reading. So it was both interesting and fun. Yes. And then I kind of thought, well, what can you do as a historian? Because I started with political science because I thought that might be more useful. And I thought, okay, I'll continue and see where this can lead. And then it could lead to a PhD. So then I continued. So that in a way is one way of looking at it. Then another would be that I've always really liked reading and reading about people from different periods. I always loved stories. And those kind of things, I mean, is the more kind of why I found this interesting and why I found a passion in it.
What's your PhD about?
It's about ways in which people thought about the world and thought about the geographical parts of the world in 17th century Sweden. So if you had a person in 17th century Sweden sitting down to make a map of the world, what would be on that map?
Exactly.
And that's why I try to ask in the book.
And you sort of look at maps.
I look at maps, and it's or I guess maps is one of the kind of the source materials I use. So I look at these. So these geographical worldviews, and these geographical worldviews, I mean, they can manifest themselves in maps, but they can also perhaps be expressed in words. So I look at geography education, what kind of thoughts that are expressed in that, and what kind of worldviews are expressed in that, and then also in travel narratives.
Maps, they tell a story.
They do. They tell many stories, I think. So you have a map maker will have had an intent by making the map. For example, so you have for example maps made for Norman Sicily in the 12th century. So, and these maps, because Sicily was a really powerful center of power then, and under Roger II. And these maps, they tend to portray Sicily as a much bigger island than it is compared to all the other islands around. And of course, the kind of intent with the map is somehow showing that
it's powerful.
Yes. So there's a story being told by that map. But then, of course, that map can also tell us stories that are not necessarily intended. For example, the fact that they are an amalgamation of Islamic knowledge, so the map is centered with south at the top of a map, which Muslim maps usually were, but also because the map maker was writing for a Christian prince, so there are also these Christian elements in the map and kind of showcasing the meeting point that Sicily was at the time. And that's not necessarily something that the map was intending to tell, but it does anyway. If you're in
retrospect.
Yes, in retrospect, exactly.
It's so amazing what it can tell us about that. And what inspired you to do that sort of study?
It's it's a bit again kind of these random things that lead you on, right? But I was doing an exchange year in the US, and I was taking courses on European history.
Yeah.
And they all talked about in Europe in the 17th century societies were like this, or these things were important. And I kept thinking, well, that's not really what I remember from what I studied in Sweden. That didn't really hold true for Scandinavia. It would held true certainly for France or for England, but not for the kind of north of Scandinavia. Well, sometimes it did, but not always. So I started thinking about what we meant with the concept Europe. Yeah. And then so we say Europe, but maybe we actually mean Western Europe or other things. And then I started thinking about what it meant in the 17th century, and thought that I would like to study that. And then kind of from there it grew to look at the world. So yeah.
And now you are studying something a little different, though.
Yes.
Still will travel in mind.
Yeah. So it's a project that at the kind of first sight feels very different, but it has quite a lot of the same theoretical questions are there. Yeah. So it's a project about health and morality in 17th and 18th century Sweden, and it looks at the sauna and how people use the sauna, and what kind of ideas about health and practices regarding health and morality were practiced there. So I think the kind of common theme that I keep exploring both in the PhD and then now in this project on the sauna is the ways in which people make knowledge or make truth claims. So when you say something, you make a claim that is true, or you make an assumption about its truthfulness. And so it fascinates me to think about the ways in which we authorize, or we somehow either try to make other people believe that what we say is true, or the ways in which we ourselves base our beliefs on. And those might be ideas about science, or ideas about the ways in which we reach conclusions. When it comes to maps, so the 17th century maps that I study, they base their knowledge on ancient writers. So they're in the 17th century, but they're looking back and 1,700 years ago, and kind of using the assumptions that the ancient Greek and Roman authors had about what the world looked like to also base their knowledge. But of course, in the 17th century, Europeans had recently reached America, discovered, we sometimes say, but from their point of view, discovered. So suddenly that knowledge, that was the geographical knowledge of the ancients, didn't really, it wasn't enough. So you needed something more. So they were in a process of kind of reconciling the fact that their authorities were not enough, and there's a fascinating tension there between saying that we still believe that the ancient writers were kind of, we used their assumptions about what the world looked like, but we had to add something new. And then you can either maybe just add something new to the conceptual scheme you already have, or you can change the entire worldview that you had and say, well, okay, so now we don't have 3 continents, that is Asia, Europe and Africa, but they are actually one continent, and America is a second continent. So there you have then tried to change the framework because new knowledge has come in. So, and the same can go for the sauna. The ways in which people think about health is either maybe based on the kind of the practice and the kind of seeing that people become warm in saunas, and then you think that, okay, so that has to do with, and you reference that back on ideas that you have about how the body is made up of humors that are in balance, or should be in balance, and so on.
Does it say something about society that we're in now as well?
Well, I think it does. First of all, it gives the fact that ways of looking at the world are fluid, and ways of saying what is healthy and what is moral are also in some sense fluid, that is an important lesson for society today. And we can perhaps make that lesson or get that lesson without history, but history is a really useful tool for because so much has changed over time. So I think that's history can also teach us ways in which our cultures can change, and the things that we define as something that is important for us can actually be relatively recent or can change a few generations later, and that's also a useful reminder. But then I think there's a second part of this of why I find why I come to study the things that I do, and it's in a way, and it's a bit navel gazing, I guess, because so what are researchers doing? Well, we're trying to authorize knowledge. We're finding ways of saying that the truth claims that we make are valid. So in a way, my research is really looking at in different ways that people have done that in history. So I have one of my project that I did, a 1-year postdoc that I finished in October, which was on working on the Swedish geographer and historian and medic Ulrikke, who thought he had discovered Atlantis.
Great.
Yes, yes. And he also thought that Sweden was Atlantis. So he was a professor of medicine in Uppsala in late 17th century. And he had. So
we're sitting in Atlantis.
We're sitting in Atlantis. Yes, absolutely. And Rudbeck, he got this idea from reading the Greek ancient authors, and he realized that, he thought that he realized that some of the names of the Greek ancient authors, he could recognize them when he was making a map of old Sweden. He could feel that, there's an affinity of names here, and then he started rereading Plato and Strabo and all the kind of the authors that was important at the time, and he saw, there's lots of things here that I can that actually speak rather to Sweden than to the Mediterranean. For example, saying that the landscape in the Iliad is described as quite misty and kind of cold, and actually that doesn't really describe Greek well at all, but it works really well for Sweden. So then
certainly.
So he, of course, when we look at him now, he seems completely crazy in some way, saying that a madman. But then he also gained quite a lot of popularity in his time, and he wrote a 4-volume work where he explained this and dedicated his entire career to it, and became very influential. So you have to think then, what is it in that time period where he lived that made those assumptions that he made feel welcome and even believed by the people around him, and that says something about their ways that they considered what was truth.
But do you think that's a political sort of?
It was in some ways political, because this was a time when Sweden had claims to be a superpower, regional superpower. So to portray Sweden as a country that was strong and powerful and had a long history of being at the height of civilization.
So it was like Sicily enhancing their size.
Yes, exactly.
Sweden decided that it was Atlantis.
Yes, in some ways it was. But I think actually Rudbeck also believed it. And that he wasn't alone in saying that he had found Atlantis at the time, and he certainly wasn't alone in trying to trace genealogies for his own country going back in time. So I guess it's only because it's political doesn't mean that people didn't believe in it. And that's true, of course, today as well.
Of course. But I think that's very cool with this, the political aspect of building culture. Like choosing sort of like a time point where you're really proud of your country. And then making that sort of like, that's what we aim and strive for.
I think
and use that through a lot of different, not just language, but making maps, like enhancing our size and making us more central. And
Rudbeck, he made maps, and that was what I looked at in my study. The maps that he made and the ways that he tried to make his argument more believable and more appealing by using maps.
That's amazing. I love how that if we look at certain aspects of our history and our cultures, say so much about the people that were there and their hopes and dreams as well.
Yes, and I think that's every historian's or most historians' dream, to get that kind of to get the personal, to find somehow. I mean, sometimes the historical documents we have are frustratingly silent, that we don't really get to the kind of people's innermost feelings, or the way that these quirky little things that make them persons rather than just documents. But sometimes you do, and then that's a great sense when you can get.
I think I'm gonna let that be our last word.
Okay, well, that sounds great.
And I will of course have some links to your site on Stockholm University, so people can find you.
That's good.
And just more that we can find, so people are able to contact.
That sounds great.
In that case, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.